Welcome to Inside Photo Organizing, from DIY to Pro. I am Allison Friedman from Arrange Wander Focus of Chicago, Illinois.
I am Susan Wallach from Save a Memory of Northern Colorado. This podcast focuses on preserving memories and stories through our photos and videos.
Together, we will provide photo organizing tips and tricks for everyone from the person who wants to do it yourself to other pros in our industry. We will also bring you the latest software and hardware for photo and digital asset management. We're passionate about helping you turn disorganized memories into stories you can cherish and share.
We will be answering your questions, and we hope that as you learn more, you can complete your own storytelling and photo organizing project and feel more confident to finally know that you can preserve and find those special memories with ease. Join us on this journey of learning how to preserve the memories that matter. All right. Well, this day I'm really excited because we've got a really awesome guest today. But before we get going, how are you today, Allison?
I'm good. I have decided to be in the snow today, change the background for the new year. So happy new year to all of our listeners. And one reason for this is because I've been without heat for 2 weeks and we have another 10 days upstairs, not my
Oh
entire
no.
house, but
Okay.
upstairs. So thus the snow, I'm embracing it. I'm good. But things are good. How are you, Susan?
I'm well. I'm just working through, what you need to work through during the holiday season, trying to get some last minute client work done. And oh, and I got a new kitten. I didn't even tell you that before we
Oh
started the
yeah.
call. So, yeah, I had adopted one. Her name's Luna, a pretty black cat. I think over the summer, like I want to say it was like August, I think I picked her up. Anyway, so she's about 8, 9 months now, and she is not getting anywhere trying to befriend my 20-year-old cat. And cats really do like to have buddies. So I decided if I'm going to do it, now is the time to do it, so that they can grow up together. So I haven't quite figured out her name, although I'm leaning toward Moana, just because
Okay.
it's a nice Hawaiian name, and I like
Yeah.
my Hawaiian uh, cultural background there that I learned when I was there living in the islands. So I think I will be leaning toward Moana, but we'll see.
I
So,
think if she wanders by, you need to pick her up and show her. I'm sure everybody would want to see.
well, I don't let a kitten meander around the house on their own when they're that young. So she's in the bathroom right now.
Ah.
But here's Luna. Luna, do you want to come up? You want to say hi?
Someday I'll get the dog on here, but he's sleeping on the bed behind me. Oh, there she is.
Yeah. So that's
Okay,
Luna.
everybody, say hi to Luna.
So, yep.
We thought about once getting a second dog because my dog definitely needs companionship, and decided against it. We actually have a neighbor dog that we take care of all the time, and in fact have her for next week. So we were taping a couple weeks before, as usual, a couple weeks before the new year or a week before Christmas, and we have her over the holidays. So she has gifts and things we have for her. So we decided a second dog was unnecessary, because
Well,
also when
yeah,
we go away, it's easier to place a single dog. Anyway,
yeah.
we digress as we usually do. But it is, we are now, this is the first episode of season 3, which is kind of exciting, and 2025, and who knows what that will bring, but I am excited, and I'm insanely excited that we're starting off with this particular episode, Susan, which I know you have an introduction for.
Yeah, I have been a fan of this person ever since I learned about her, and I think she spoke at one of our conferences. I can't remember, but anyway, however I came upon learning of her and her project, it has just been an inspiration to me. And one day I hope to take action here. But so what we're talking about is a movie. It's a documentary. So if you are not familiar with it, here's a little statement, which I will preface was created by ChatGPT because I know how much Allison loves that.
I just want us to be straightforward. That's all. That's all.
So,
And when you
um,
read it to me, it didn't sound like the Susan I know. But ChatGPT did an excellent job, I will say, on summing up this guest and this video.
okay.
So let's welcome ChatGPT to our show. And it can introduce or give a little background.
Our guests are probably just shaking their heads at this point.
Probably.
All right. Lives Well Lived is an uplifting documentary celebrating the wisdom, resilience, and life stories of 40 people aged 75 to 100. Through their personal reflections, the film explores themes of love, perseverance, loss, and joy, offering insights on how to live a meaningful life. It's all a testament to the power of human spirit and the value of embracing life at every stage. Lives Well Lived was created by filmmaker Sky Bergman. She directed, produced, and conducted the interviews for the documentary, inspired by her own grandmother's vitality and wisdom at age 99. So, with that, we want to welcome onto our podcast Sky Bergman.
Thank you for that introduction, both of you and ChatGPT. That was actually pretty good. It
my.
does help in a pinch to summarize things for sure.
It does. Susan and I have a little disagreement about ChatGPT, so we can't help it when we start using it. We have to go back and forth a little bit. But we're really excited to have you on and talk about you and your documentary. I actually rewatched it a few days ago. I actually had just met with a client too who I thought would love it and suggested it to her, and she watched it, and then she sent me all these questions, but I don't know that we'll quite get there today. But it's such a wonderful documentary. So
Thank
if
you.
you could go ahead and, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background, and whatever you want to add. Tell us about the lovely lady behind you who's about to beat you with some cooking
You
utensils.
bet, you bet. So, I think you actually did a pretty nice job of introducing me, but I've taught for 30 years at the university, photography and video. And I was approaching 50 and looking for positive role models of aging and just not finding them out there in the media. And this was about 12 years ago. I'm 59 now. And here I had my grandmother, who is in the background right there, who at the age of 100 was still working out at the gym. And I thought, oh my goodness, in my own family, I have this really positive role model. And I need to highlight and find other people out there like my grandmother who are living full lives that can be my role model of what I'm looking for as I'm aging, because I'm really grateful in the last 10 years, 12 years, there's been a lot more that's out there in the media, and that just makes me so happy. But when I started this project, that really wasn't the case. And so I spent 4 years interviewing 40 people, as you mentioned, with a collective life experience of 3,000 years, starting with my grandmother. And then another year of editing, so 5 years total of working on the film. And it's been a true labor of love. It's really struck a nerve. So many people have watched it. I mean, I never in a million years thought it would end up on PBS, and they just extended my contract for another 4 years. So
Nice.
it's on PBS and Amazon and iTunes, and this sleepy little project that I really started as something very personal. And I always say to my students, the more personal a project, the more universal it becomes. And this was incredibly personal to me, starting with my grandmother. And it has become such a universal film has touched so many people worldwide. So that is a little more of an intro, I hope.
I just can't express how much joy your film brings to me when I watch it. And I think it resonates for me maybe a little bit differently than maybe Allison. I don't know. I can't speak for her, but she'll I'm sure comment. Um, is that I was raised I was adopted, but my mother was Italian, and my
Mm.
father was Polish. And so a lot of the stories of your Italian side of the family and everything, I could totally relate, to Lucky Lou and all
Yeah.
those other individuals in the movie. And so it it was just like a homecoming, watching, your
I
your
love that.
grandmother in the kitchen, cooking pasta or spaghetti or whatever. I was
Yeah,
like right at home there. And so
nice.
it just warms my heart and brings a tear to my eye,
Mhm.
just because I can totally relate with those stories. And, being in this business of photo organizing and photo management and telling people stories and preserving their stories, I thought this was a perfect way to start the new year.
Yeah.
And just to kind of highlight how important it is to capture those stories before it's too late.
Absolutely. One of the questions, so I came up with a list of like 20 questions, which are on my website. Anyone can have them. That's a starting point because I think the hardest thing when you're trying to collect stories is like, what questions do you ask? And so I spent 6 months working on the questions and worked with people in the university here and the social sciences department and the psychology of aging department and said, hey, this is a project that I'm working on. What kind of questions should I ask that would be open-ended? And anyway, but one of the questions was, what is the biggest regret that you have? And interestingly enough, the biggest regret that people had was not asking a question of somebody that had then passed away and leaving those questions unanswered. And so I really, I think I took that to heart. It's like, ask those questions. Don't wait because you just never know. So don't have that as a regret. I've tried to make it easy for people. If you don't know where to start, go to my website. The take action part of my website has a little tutorial on how to even conduct an interview and some things to do and to make it as easy as possible for more people to really be interested and engaged and wanting to collect people's stories.
That's
That's something
fantastic.
that's something we've talked about a lot. I will say, for our listeners, we will have a link to that section of your website on our
Great.
show notes so that everyone will have easy access. But I hear that a lot, and something I've thought a lot. Two of my grandparents I never really met.
Mm.
They either passed before I was born or I was very, very young, and the others were also I was maybe 10 max.
Yeah.
Like I just didn't. But my kids have very good relationships with their grandparents, and in the last year or so, they're getting older, and we've
Mm.
started to think about that more. Like we need to get these stories down, and we
Yeah.
talk with clients a lot. The one client I actually had, she watched your documentary like last week after I'd rewatched it before doing this podcast and I recommended it, and she said, wow, she said she wished you could have interviewed her parents. But then she said she wished she had been able to ask these questions while her parents were still able to answer them,
Yeah.
because there comes a point where either they pass or they're here but the stories are still lost, so
Mhm.
preserving them now is so important. And the way you did it is just, it's engrossing. I mean, I sat down, so I'd seen it before because you did speak at, I forget which conference it was,
It might have
and I'd
been
watched
Denver.
it then, maybe like 2000, I don't know. But I was gonna get it. I forget where I streamed it from, but I said to my husband, I said, I'm gonna watch this tonight in readying for this podcast. And I said, do you want to watch it with me? And I sent him the trailer. He's like, oh yeah. And we sat down and watched it together. He never watches that kind of stuff with me ever. But the two of us, again, and even though I'd already seen it, we're so engrossed with just listening to people's stories and the way you were able to pull them out. I mean, we don't see you much on the film.
No, and
The
that was very intentional because I really wanted it to be about the people in the film and not about me. And so the only place that you see me is where I'm interacting with my grandmother. And I feel like that makes sense because the story really came about because of my grandmother and my connection to her. But everywhere else, I really wanted to have the people that were in the film be the narrators of their own story. And I think that that's really important, is to give the space. And I think the credence and the let people tell their own stories. A lot of times I think the biggest problem when people do an interview is that they maybe step over somebody and don't let them just say their own thing. Let the silent moments happen, and then sometimes the best stories happen. And so that was really important to me, to let them tell their own story, and for me to be there, but really in the background. So I'm glad
So,
that you picked up on that.
so
Yeah,
speak
I
a
am
little bit.
curious. Oh, sorry, one quick question. What did your grandmother think of this process?
Well, it was really funny because, she was the first person that I interviewed. And it really started because I went back for her 100th birthday and she was at the gym. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to film her, because nobody's going to believe that at like 100, she's still working out at the gym. And I thankfully had her mic'd, because at that point, I had never done anything. I mean, I did like little cooking videos of my grandmother up to this point. So this was really, I say, if I can do this, you can do it too. If you have a passion for something, you just follow through. But I at least did learn that sound is actually more important than the images. And so I had a mic on her. And just as a throwaway comment, I said, "Hey, Grandma, can you give me some words of wisdom?" That was like the beginning of the whole project. And she said, "Yeah, live life to the limits and be kind." And I think that my grandmother kind of would always say to me, because we talked every day, she said, how's that project with the old people coming along?" And she never thought of herself as old, which I think was funny, because she was the oldest of the old people that I interviewed. But she, I think, got a real big kick out of it. She was able to see the film. We did a sneak preview of the film, and she flew out from Florida to California at the age of 103 and a half to see the film on the big screen. Best night of my life. And she got her 15. She always wanted to get her 15 minutes of fame. She got that and more, but at least she got her 15 minutes of fame while she was alive. And she, greeted everybody that came in. So I think in the end, she got it, but as I was working on it, I think she didn't really understand. She's like, "What's so important about my life and what I've done?" And I think there are a lot of people that feel that way. And I think one of the people in the film actually said to me, because I did an interview with four of the people in the film, and I was saying how grateful I was to all the people in the film for sharing their stories, because without them, of course, I wouldn't have anything. And they had to really open up their hearts and their stories to me. And he said, "Thank you for validating our lives and for wanting to collect our stories." And we sometimes forget that piece of the puzzle, that people want to share their stories. They want to feel like they had a sense of purpose, and have a sense of purpose, and what that sharing their story gives them a little bit of that, and validates their lives a little bit, and I think gives them a time to reflect back on their life well lived. So it was a great process all the way around.
So how did you go from interviewing your grandmother to like finding 40 other people or whatever?
Yeah.
It seems
Well,
like one wasn't enough or
no. Well, I knew that, my grandmother was wonderful, but I wanted to, she's one, right? And if you could say, oh, well, one person, she's an anomaly. But I knew there were other people out there like my grandmother. I knew that it wasn't just people in nursing homes and not doing well, like I was seeing on the media. And so I sent an email blast out to all my friends, family, and all the alum that I've taught over the years I've been at the university. And I gave them a link to the clip of that I put together of my grandmother at the gym. And I just said, "Hey, I'm working on this project." Had no idea I was going to make a feature film. I said, "I'm working on this project and I'm looking for other people out there like my grandmother. Can you nominate, if you know somebody in your life that's like this, can you nominate them?" And I was quite literally inundated by heartwarming, amazing nominations. I mean, it was incredible. And so that was how I started. And then at some point, when I did realize that I wanted to make a feature film, I really wanted to show a diverse group of people. And so I started seeking out some particular stories. Like, it was very important for me to share what happened during World War II here in our own country, and to talk about the Japanese internment or incarceration. And so I very intentionally sought out somebody who could speak to that. And so, I had some of those stories that I really like asked certain people. But in the beginning, it was all about like putting out a call for entries, basically. That was
well,
how it started.
and you speak to how you wove in those other historical events. You did
Yeah.
that so brilliantly, and
Thank you.
the film portions that you were able to add and show of the people in, as they were children,
Yeah.
now they're, seniors and they can talk about their stories. That must have been quite the research project for you.
It was quite a research project. I did have some help. I had a really good friend of mine, Catherine Trujillo, who used to work at the library here at Cal Poly and now works in New Mexico at the museum there. She is amazing, and she did help me track down a lot of the stuff. And then we would go to people's homes and just ask them. I mean, I remember one person had a bunch of Super 8 video, and and he had an old Super 8 projector, and we literally were projecting it, and I had my camera like filming it so that I could have some of that footage. Because I think, we use the film to connect generations. We show the film to older adults and to students and connect them to like tell each other stories. I think especially for the students, it's really important for them to see those people that are in the film at their age, at a younger age. I think there is something that connects us in a different way when we see those people in the film, and we can relate in a very different way because we see them as teenagers, as, whatever age, but especially for me, one of the most poignant moments was, for those of you that haven't seen the film, there's one person that I interviewed. Her name was Marion Wolf, who she was on the very first kinder transport out of Vienna, Austria. And what that was before the war happened, the Quakers in the United Kingdom were trying to rescue as many kids as they could. And they rescued 10,000 German and Austrian kids that went over by train, and then they were fostered during the war, many of whom lost their parents. But they got them out and they saved them. And she was on the very first kinder transport out of Vienna, Austria, and at the age of 8 years old. And she knew that there was some footage of her landing in the United Kingdom because it was the very first one. And she had seen like 4 seconds of this footage in some other documentary. And so tracking that down was amazing. But seeing that, and then it ended up UCLA Film Archive owned the rights to it. It was a Hearst Corporation that had it, and they donated to them. They sent me that whole footage from that day, so she was able to see other footage that she had never seen of herself
That's
coming off the
fantastic.
boat, which was
Wow.
amazing. But for me, I know when I see that it's only 4 seconds of footage, but when I see that 4 seconds, I'm still getting chills. I think, what was I doing at 8 years old? Like, how would I
Right.
have handled this? And I can feel that because I see her. I see that in her eyes, that, like, that's traumatic experience that's just happened. And I can put myself in her shoes. So it was incredibly important to try and find as much historic footage as we could to really set the stage for the stories that we were telling in the film.
That part of the film gave me chills.
Yeah.
I just have to say, I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, I don't obviously remember any of that. I was not alive, but I've heard about it. I've grown up hearing about it.
Mhm.
And one of the things that made me think about was, I have two college kids, neither of whom were home yet at the time, or I
Mhm.
would have actually had them watch this movie. I still might. But I don't know. One of them's a history buff, so he probably knows a lot of what was in that film. The other one's not. And
Mhm.
while he knows basic outlines, like things that were taught in school and things we've talked about at home, there's so much more. And it's incredibly powerful to see these people that you're interviewing who have lived through this and not only talk about it, but also have that video. And I mean, I can't even imagine what she was thinking when she saw that video
I
again
actually
and to
videoed her as
watch.
she was watching it so that I have that. I haven't done anything with it. I haven't used it, but
Hmm.
somehow I knew that I needed to preserve that. And, I think that having that video and that historic context, I think it's one thing to read about history in a
Yeah.
book, but another thing to hear that firsthand account. And you can really empathize more and understand more. It's not just a blanket 120,000 people were incarcerated because they were of Japanese descent in America. You hear somebody's story about what they went through, and that they lost their husband who fought in the war, and that she was left with two young kids. And, when you hear that story, it gives you a different impression of what it meant rather than just reading a number and reading a historical fact. So I think in that way, it has really resonated with many people because it is a firsthand account and because
Yeah.
it's teaching history, but in a very different way. And in fact, I'm very proud of the fact that PBS Learning Media has it on their website for K through 12 educators to be able to use parts of the film in their classrooms with all the core standards and everything. So it makes it really easy for them to plug and play and put it into a classroom, which was always a dream of mine. And I'm grateful that it came true for the film.
That's
Yeah, that's
amazing. I didn't know that. But if we have any teachers listening, take note. Go watch this documentary. Maybe you can use it.
Yeah.
I will say the stories. I mean, you have a variety of stories, and some of them, the historical ones like that, I found extremely powerful, but the others are too. And I'm just thinking about, like I said, I can't go interview my grandparents, but I'd actually like my kids to interview their grandparents.
Hmm.
And everybody has some kind of amazing story. It's just a matter of finding it
Yep.
and telling it. And no, we're not going to make a feature film or a documentary, but preserving that is just, it's so important.
Absolutely. My motto is everyone has a story to tell if we just take the time to listen. And so many times I would interview people and they'd say, I don't have any, why I don't know why I got nominated for this. And you dig deeper and everyone has something. I mean, like even my grandmother, and I'd say, Grandma, you were alive and you remember women marching to try and get the right to vote. I mean, that's amazing. Like, I don't have that historical context. You do. You were there. You lived it. And so to hear those stories, I think it's really amazing, but you have to take the time to really listen and you have to be interested and engaged. And I really did my research before I went and interviewed people. So I would give them the list of questions ahead of time and I would ask them to answer them ahead of time. Not everybody does that because sometimes people like it to be more spontaneous. But for me, I did that because then I would go and not bring my camera gear, just go to their house and have a cup of coffee or tea with them and sit and talk and go over some of those questions because first of all, when I came with my cameras, because I didn't know most of these people before I did the interviews. So when I would come with my cameras, we were already friends. I also had a better understanding of what their story really was going to be and what direction I wanted to go in. So I like to say, be prepared, but remain adaptable because also some crazy stuff happens when you start interviewing things and stories come out of the woodwork that you had never anticipated. And, don't be afraid to ask the follow-up questions, push a little harder and people will shut down if they don't want to answer. But 9 times out of 10, people really just want to be asked. And sometimes we brush aside and move on to the next thing. In the beginning, I'm just talking from experience because in the beginning I had a list of 20 questions and by God, I was going to get through those 20 questions. And I didn't always slow down enough to go, oh God, they just, I'd listen to the interview afterwards and think, why didn't I ask a follow-up to that? And I learned, thankfully they were all gracious and I could go back and re-interview people, but I did learn because we have a motto here at the university, learn by doing, which I lived that motto. So I was learning as I was, really learning how to do an interview and asking the follow-up questions, really actively listening as people were giving their answers. And then the other thing that I would do is sometimes they would say something like many people do, and it would be kind of a run-on thing. And I knew I couldn't use that one gem that was there. And I would say, now everybody's going to know my secret, but I'd say, what you just said about X, Y, and Z, that was so brilliant. But I forgot to hit record on my audio gear. Can we redo that? So I put the onus on me, not that they didn't say it in a way that I couldn't use it, but it's like, oh, that one thing, can you just say that one thing? And it was great. And usually it came out even better the second time. And it was something that I could use. So, don't be afraid to redo, blame yourself, not your subject, and just, redo until you get it right. It's digital. You can delete it.
So you talk about, all these individuals you interviewed, and many of them didn't have a problem being photographed and recorded, right? Video recorded. And
Yeah.
and so growing up, I had my mother, she did not like to be recorded or photographed or back in the day when you're carrying around the big VHS recorder, she would just hide or squirm. She did not like that. Now, what she did agree to on occasion was a group photo of the family. If I put the camera on a tripod and said, "All right, we're taking our annual family
Mhm.
photo," she would, relent to that. But um, how did you? I mean, did you? With the people you weren't aware of, clearly you probably had to warm up to them and tell them what was
Mhm.
going on and get a leg in there. One time with my mother, I set up my video camera and I pointed it into the kitchen where an Italian always is, right? And
Absolutely.
I just crossed my fingers that I could hear the audio, and I just pointed it, hit record, and I walked in and just started asking my mother some historical questions, how did you and dad meet and all this kind of stuff. And luckily I was able to capture that recording. But did you find sometimes that you had to just turn the cameras off and get the audio from these people and then put their audio with other pictures rather than on them? Did you
Not so much. No, I think because the people that I was interviewing were nominated by somebody else, so they must have already had agreed to be part of this. So I think that I had a willing audience. It wasn't like I just said, "Oh, please do that." Somebody else had already said, "Please do this." So I think that really helped. I think the other thing is that I would just start recording from the moment that I got there. And so some stuff was like before people started realize that we were even recording, because I think that that's super important. I think sometimes there are people when they get onto camera, they get a little like, stiff. And I think the other thing was though that I didn't really bring a lot of gear. I tried to keep it very low key. And so it was really felt more like just a conversation. And I think that by the time that I was, at the end of my process, people just kind of forgot about that they were being recorded because we were just having a conversation. And I have hours of footage that I will never use because I didn't want to like try and just do it and run and gun and get it out in and out. I really just let the conversations go because the best stuff happened at the end when they were looser and I'd been there for a while. And again, I don't care. It's digital. I can just delete it. Hard drives don't cost that much. Was much better just to kind of let things go. And if I felt like people were stiff, then I'd try and do something that opened them up a little bit. And whether it was telling a story from me about me and my relationship with my grandmother, that usually helped. I think people realized why I was doing this project. It was really a labor of love and a love of my grandmother. And I think that opened a lot of people up in ways that maybe they wouldn't have been open before. And then the reality is that, you bring all this together and there's 40 people that I interviewed, not all 40 people made the final cut of the film. And some people can have really great stories. And I was a still photographer before this and a writer and real easy to go in and take a still photo and write something about someone, much more difficult to have them tell their story. And not everyone can do that. And some people ended up
Yeah.
on the cutting room floor who had great stories, but they just were not engaging on camera. And I had to, I felt terrible. I gave their families all the whole footage that I shot. Everyone that I interviewed ended up with a film credit at the end because I felt like that was really important to acknowledge everyone that I had actually interviewed, but not everyone made the final cut of the film.
Well, that's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the families have that footage, which is great.
Yeah.
I was actually just thinking while you were talking about, people are listening to this and they get inspired. And, they're not going to go out and interview 40 people they don't know, but they might start talking to parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and things. And I was wondering about, I think a lot of people initially, if that camera's on, you're right, they're kind of stiff or they're not super comfortable. But when it's on for a while, they kind of forget. And I was thinking about people doing with their phones. And, they're not going to no one wants to sit there and like do this in front of
Yeah.
you. But maybe you get one of those little tripods like Susan showed us on our last podcast, or this little doohickey that I have here now, and set it kind of on the side and just hit record and,
Yeah.
make sure you're actually capturing and people are in the frame. But
Right.
I think people will forget, if it's
Yeah.
not you holding a phone, okay, now tell me,
Right.
Right.
what
I
did
think
you
when you
do?
have that device and it's so present. I mean, I started
Yeah.
out as I was a geek. So let me just preface it by saying this, but when I was like, I don't know, 10, 12, being Italian, as you know, we sit around the table, like Sundays are the whole day is eating, right? And the meal starts at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and lasts until the evening. And when the fruits and nuts came out, that was usually when the best stories came out as well. And so I would literally, this is going to date me, but I would put a cassette recorder on the table
Mm,
and just record the conversations because I don't think I've ever done anything with that, but it seemed
That's
important.
gold.
Like it seemed like that those moments, those conversations, even though there was the clinking of the glasses and whatever, I still have that. And so it wasn't a camera in somebody's face. And to your point before, yes, you could just do audio recording if that makes people more comfortable and put photos over that. I think, I said this before, but I'll say it again because it bears repeating. The most important thing is actually the audio because
yeah.
you can, people will forgive bad image quality. If you've ever watched something on YouTube and the image quality is terrible, but if the sound is good, you will watch it to the end if you're engaged. If it's the other way around, you will turn it off. So
Yep.
you really, the best thing is to really get good sound. And it's not that hard to get good sound these days. I mean, I have a little mic that I'm speaking into that was like $70. You really don't have to have very expensive gear. But you do have to pay attention to that. And some things that I do, like when I go into somebody's house to interview them, I'm listening to the ambient sound and maybe if it's a really noisy room, I'll try and bring them to another room that doesn't have a lot of noise, so it's not distracting. The other thing that I've done is if there's a refrigerator, because notoriously those things will go off right in the middle of an interview, I will unplug it and I will put my car keys in the refrigerator so I can remember to turn it back on when I leave. But I don't have that noise, that's going to come on because those little things, like take that extra moment to just think about those little things because they can really make a difference. And the person that you interview will say something amazing and that's when the refrigerator goes on. So
Yeah.
thinking about those little things really will make your life a lot easier when you're editing in the end. But don't be afraid to just do audio or just even write down somebody's story. I mean, even if the audio is terrible, you at least have something and you have their story and you could still do something beautiful. And maybe if you want to do a video, maybe somebody else does the voice narration. And, you've seen that in a number of movies where the person's not alive anymore and they have somebody else that narrates for them instead. The most important thing is capturing the stories.
So
I
we
do
have an
think,
audience.
go ahead. Go ahead.
We have an audience that is made up, I believe, of other professional photo organizers, people that are interested in doing, legacy work, such as what this documentary was about, as well as audience members who are do-it-yourselfers. So
Mhm.
for those that are listening today, what would be your recommendation on equipment and, how did you've got a long history of being in education and teaching people how to manage probably video and photos and stuff. But what would you say, to help somebody just getting started about what it is they need to get, their first interview done?
For
Don't
for
let
both,
the
actually.
Yeah.
If you could do both for like a sort of professional and also the DIY, because I think they'd be a little
Right.
different.
I would say don't let the equipment be what stops you. That's my best advice. The best camera that you have is the one that you have with you. And for most people, that's your phone. And so if that's what you have to use, that's fine. If that's what you have, make sure you have it in airplane mode when you're doing an interview. If you can, they sell little lapel mics that you can actually connect to your phone so that you'll get better sound. Because of course, if you have the mic here as opposed to farther away, you're going to get better sound. So for somebody that has very little resources, just using your phone and getting some kind of a mic is great. If you have more resources, then getting, a better camera. I usually shoot with 2 or 3 camera angles so that I can cut in and, cut back and forth from one angle to the next. Also, that helps me get rid of the ums and the ahs because it gives me a place to be able to cut without people realizing that I'm doing that. And it's just much easier if you have 2 camera angles. So I usually will do one on the side that's kind of more close up, and then one that shows the whole environment. There's a range of cameras depending on what your budget is. It really depends. But I also, because I've been doing this so long now, I do have separate audio that I do. So I really get the best sound that I can get. Because again, for me, there have been times where I just use the audio. I mean, my film shows that I use a lot of the audio, and it doesn't even really matter what the video looks like because I've got the historical footage. And of course, for your group and the people that are interested in legacy and they have lots of photos and maybe even videos, that's having the sound of somebody's voice and then having those images over it is wonderful. So those would be my recommendations. Another thing is if you're interviewing somebody, and I have some of these tips on my website as well, thinking about light, like light is super important. Where you're putting somebody in terms of the location, don't put them so that the window is behind them. Really think about lighting them from this, window light is beautiful, but also even right here, I have like a big, you can't see it because it's white, a big white card just to bounce some light back onto me. I use that all the time. When I'm filming people, I will use sometimes LED lights, but I really like to use natural light when I can, and but really paying attention to the natural light. And I also really pay attention to the person's environment and try and make the background something that relates to them. So really thinking about not having a lot of clutter behind them, but something that maybe tells a little bit something about them.
I love that. Such great tips. I will say on the microphone, like I have this, but this is actually, I'm just listening
Right.
because it's not, and I have one of these as well.
Yeah.
And I think it was, I don't know, $65,
Yeah, so they're not
maybe.
terribly expensive. So
Yeah.
it's worth the investment. If you're going to invest the time, it's worth the investment to get a minimal amount of gear. That's going to make your life a lot easier.
So
I
I have
do think
another technical
one last
question.
point, and then we'll go to,
Okay.
because this is just related to the sound issue. But I do think so for people that are listening that just want to do this for, their own grandma. This is not anything else. It's just they want to capture it. 2 things. One thing I do with clients a lot is we'll discover partway through, they're like, oh, well, I have this voicemail
Mm-hmm.
from, someone who passed. And you had said, take the sound and add it to photos. So one thing we do a lot is we'll take that voicemail, just add a photo to it, and all of a sudden you have a movie.
Yeah.
So just a sort of side tip. But the other thing is that, iPhones and Android phones, they're great. And if it's for you and this is what you've got, just go ahead and use them. And some of your tips would help with that because they'll pick up good sound, but people don't think about the other sounds in the room. We're so used to the notifications coming in. So I love your airplane mode tip, right? I mean, when we do these, I turn everything on do not disturb because how many texts and dings do we get in an hour? A lot. I hadn't thought about the refrigerator, but moving to a quieter space and trying to think about the ambient sound, or maybe even doing a test recording and for 2 minutes and just or 5 minutes and just listen to it and see what's in the background that you can turn off. I think that's brilliant for the people who are, well, for everybody. But if you were listening to this saying, well, I don't have all that equipment, I don't want it, I can't afford it, I don't want it, I just want to do this, stick with what you've got. Use the
Absolutely.
phone.
Right. I mean, I teach a digital photography class and it's all done on the phone. And
Mm.
it's, but the things that you really can do, whether you're using a professional camera or your camera on your phone, is composition, lighting, and content. That doesn't change, doesn't matter. And you don't really need, in this day and age, to have really expensive gear to get a very personal project done. So use
And
your
just
phone.
another reminder, don't shoot in portrait, shoot in landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And why is that, Susan?
well, because
Just
on
say
a
why.
TV
Yeah.
screen, it's the
Yeah.
ratio of your ratio is everything is in photography is typically landscape. It's not portrait.
Yeah.
you don't tip your TV on its end.
It's
So,
actually a really important reminder because literally everybody, everyone now is so used to filming this way because that's how you hold your
well, it's
phone.
for social media.
So,
Yeah, for
yeah,
social media,
so
TikTok, Instagram
Yeah.
stories, all that
yeah,
stuff. It's
But
yeah.
not for films, not for
Right.
yeah,
professional viewing on a TV later on.
Hmm.
yeah.
So I wanted to go in a little bit more. I've got the tech background. So I would like to know, how did you categorize and catalog all of this data to pull out the sweet spots?
Yeah.
How did
Well,
you tie all of that together? That
one
blows.
thing that's super important is that I learned as I was doing the film, you have to get transcripts of everything. And this was before, you could use automated transcripts. I had a friend of mine that I hired to do all the transcripts of everyone. And
Wow.
so I have transcripts and I do that from here on out. But it really, then I read the transcripts and I highlight what is important, and that's how I can put the story together. So I do that for every project that I work on now. Is I print out you can do it on the screen, but for me, I like the tangible quality of printing it out. And I'm still old school, and I highlight things that seem important. It's not always perfect, but it gives me a better starting point than just like trying to listen to everything. That never works. You really have to take that extra step to print out the transcript, I think.
There's
Awesome.
apps now that can do that
There's
Yeah.
tons of
too.
apps.
So
I
for
use
now
right.
it's a lot
Yeah,
easier.
I
Yeah.
use something called Otter AI. I really like it
Yeah.
because it also summarizes everything and it's super easy. But yeah, at the time when I started this 12 years ago,
Yeah.
there wasn't that. And this poor friend of mine, she loved it because she got all this great advice, but she listened to every word of every interview that I did for the film.
Yeah. I will say, I don't know
Yeah.
if this was mentioned, but the film is from 2017, right?
Yeah,
Or
it
that's when
hit
it,
theaters. 2017 was when it
okay.
was in film festivals, and it was in theaters 2018, and started on PBS in 2021.
Okay.
But you started the project 12 years ago.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So did
Very
you realize when you got started it was going to be a 5 or 6 year project? No.
Well, it's actually been way more than that because, now I just wrote a book that I just released on Amazon this past year. And it was about the lessons that I learned from the film, but also I've become very interested and engaged in connecting generations through the film and then learning about other organizations that are doing really interesting work connecting generations. And so the book is called Lives Well Lived Generations. And so more it just keeps rolling. I think as my partner Jeff would say, as long as I would like it to, I think the film will have a life well
Of its
lived.
own. Nice.
I
Yeah,
love
I just love how you interwove, like there was a question and then you had everyone answer that same question, but
Mhm.
then you would go deeper into one subject's background and then you'd bring it back and you'd ask everybody the same question. So it was well orchestrated in that way, I
Thank
felt.
you.
Yeah. So well done.
Thank you.
What, when you are sharing this with others, what would you say, for someone that's got a mother like mine that's really hard to record, you know, um, how do you maybe gathering them at the dinner table or something, like find other ways to wrangle them into storytelling?
Yeah, I mean,
That
do
was
something
pretty
with them that
sneaky
they're that
putting the
they're
cassette tape, on the,
yeah. I
yeah.
would say do something with them that they're comfortable doing so that they kind of forget they're being interviewed. And, it's super easy to put a mic on somebody like a little tiny, I use a little tiny now, it's called a pin mic, and people forget that it's there. And I did that a lot with my grandmother where she was cooking. And so she just kind of forgot, that we were even doing an interview. I think that's the best way for somebody that is feeling uncomfortable in front of a camera is just to do something with them that they really enjoy doing so that, they just kind of move beyond themselves a little bit, move out of their way for the interview in some ways.
That's
That's amazing.
amazing. Um, you
Was
highlighted,
there,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. No,
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, so there were so many different snippets of wisdom
Hmm.
in this movie. Like I actually was writing some of them down. I will say, so when we the way Susan and I prepare for a podcast, usually I'm the one writing the questions. We have a shared note, right? And I write the questions. So I was writing questions as watching a movie. But then I found myself also like taking notes of different things that people were saying. And I think I even put in our shared note, I'm like, Susan, you can forget this part. This is just me. Because there were just so many things that stood out to me. But I mean, obviously, your grandmother, her wisdom to you, I'm sure, was the most personal. But so let's set her aside. Sorry, Grandma. Um, but what other pieces of the actual advice and things people were saying really stood out to you personally?
Yeah, and I will say that in the book, I kind of go through this as well, and also on the website. If you go to the Film Stars page of the website, my favorite quotes from each person that I interviewed
Mm.
are there. So, because I've had so many people say that they were just like taking copious notes of what people's quotes were, but I think there were really three things that rose to the surface from all the people that I interviewed. The three commonalities. One, which was super important, is that everyone needs to feel like they have a sense of purpose, and that purpose can change over time. So, for example, one of my favorite people, besides, of course, my grandmother in the film, is Lucky Louie, who was a pediatrician turned mozzarella maker. Well, his sense of purpose used to be being a pediatrician. It changed to making mozzarellas every day for his daughter's deli. And I think that we need to have a reason to get up, to do things every day. And so that sense of purpose and knowing that it can change over time is very important. I think the other thing, and studies have proven this, is that the loneliness factor. The people in the film all had a good support system, whether it was family or friends. They had a really good support system. And then I think lastly was this, it's sort of resilience and positivity, but I feel like they're combined, which is that all the people in the film went through something really traumatic, but somehow they're able to not only look back on it with a sense of positivity, but also forward with a sense of positivity. And so this idea of it's a cliche, but life is a glass is half full rather than half empty. And I think those three common elements are something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life after having heard it in many different forms from all the people that I interviewed.
I totally agree. I think I think those are the three that I reflect back on after watching it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so well done. Let's
Well,
see if
Yeah,
there's
there
a
there was
my favorite quote was from Lucky Louie, who said, "Happiness is a state of mind. You can be happy with what you have or miserable with what you don't have. You decide." And I really feel like there's so many times when, you wake up and you're on the wrong side of the bed and whatever. And I will literally think of Lucky Louie saying that, and it will give myself an attitude adjustment because I think, okay, how can I change my attitude so that I get myself out of this funk? And, I think that was super important. I think the other thing that for me has really resonated and that I've carried forward is to really live more fully in the moment. I think that up until the time that I did the film, I was so busy, running from here to there, doing my career, and I didn't really take the time to appreciate and enjoy each moment. And I know that I do that more now because of the film and because of the people that I interviewed and their wisdom and advice.
Yeah, one of them, maybe it was Lucky Louie. I didn't write down who it was, but somebody had said, "The harder I work, the luckier I am."
Yeah,
And
that's
and
Lucky
that
Louie.
actually, well, I assumed after this discussion, but that really stuck with me too because, and it goes right in hand with living life in the moment because,
Mhm.
we all work hard. I'm sure everybody that's listening to this podcast works hard, and sometimes you get kind of stuck in that. And you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. I can't, blah, blah, blah. But somehow that statement now, I'm like, oh, well, I'm working hard. Well, that's just going to mean I'm luckier. Something good is
Right.
going to come from this.
Yeah.
And
There was another person in the film that put it in a slightly different way. Jules Hawk said, "Luck has the aroma of perspiration." And
yes.
I love that line.
Yeah.
That's a great
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. So many great nuggets. And it just felt, like even though you were interviewing these people, that you had known them for a while, just the
Mhm.
way they opened up. So you made it very welcoming to them. And yeah,
Thank you.
you shared enough of them that like the woman that was doing yoga and still teaching yoga, I was like, oh my gosh, just
Yeah.
so fascinating. And that some of them were interviewed as couples and others as individuals, but that having a support community around you is so important as you age. And so there's
Yeah, and
so
it doesn't
much.
necessarily have to be family. I mean, in
Yeah.
many cases, it was friends that was the support system, and I think that was a real revelation as well. Is that it's more important that you have that support group, but it comes in many different flavors and shapes and forms.
It kind of makes me just want to go to a senior living facility and see who would be interested in having me capture their stories, just for the practice and the gift of it, you know.
Mhm. I'm sure there'd be a lot of people that'd be willing to do that. And, that's one of the things that we do with this intergenerational project that I started at the university here with my colleague, Sarah Bartlett. She teaches a class called Psychology of Aging. And so for the service learning component part of the project, they watch the film with the older adults and then they actually interview each other and put together some kind of a memoir at the end of the quarter. And it's so wonderful because what both groups find is that they have far more in common than their differences. And really, the only difference is their age. And they learn so much from each other. And I think that we live in such an age segregated world. The more that we can do to bring generations together, the better off the world will be.
Oh, definitely.
So you've
So
you've mentioned a little bit of this, but what are you working on now? What can we look forward to seeing?
Yeah,
Because
well,
we want
besides
more from
the
you.
besides the book that just came out, I'm working on two other films. One is called Mochi Suki, and it's about the Japanese tradition of bringing in the new year by making mochi. I think I fell in love with it because Susie Edo Bauman, who's in the Lives Well Lived film, invited me to a mochi suki. They still do it, and it was amazing. Mochi, if you haven't had it, it's rice that's pounded until it's like a smooth, almost bread dough. And I personally, it's hard for me to eat because it's very chewy and you don't know when to swallow it. But I love this. I think because I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen and around food, I love these traditions that bring generations together to create something together. And the film dives into the Japanese American experience as told through mochisuki. So even during World War II, when Japanese Americans were incarcerated, they still found a way to make mochi to bring in the new year because that was such an important part of their culture, which is amazing. And the other film that I'm working on, I was a band geek when I was in junior high and high school. I played flute, clarinet, and bassoon. And I found out about this organization called the Primetime Band that is made up of about 75 people who are primarily in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe even some in their 90s, who used to play instruments when they were younger, like me, and then come back to them later in life and have this band. They rehearse every Tuesday, and then they perform throughout Santa Barbara County. But they're also part of a group, and this goes to that having a sense of purpose side of things. They're part of a group called the Music Van, where they quite literally take a van full of instruments into third grade classrooms all throughout Santa Barbara County and introduce music and instruments to third graders, many of whom have never had the opportunity to pick up an instrument. They all get to pick up an instrument and play for the first time. And to see the light in their eyes is just like phenomenal. So again, everything that I do will probably have a little bit of that intergenerational twist and connection, connecting generations together. So those are the two big projects that I'm working on.
well, that's exciting. I'm
Yeah,
very I'll be eager to see those as they get released.
I'll keep you
Are you
posted.
are you hoping they'll end up as Lives Well Lived on PBS or another
Yeah,
platform
I
like that?
mean,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. I'd love for both of them to end up on PBS. That's like any filmmaker's dream.
Mhm.
But we'll see how that goes. The Mochisuki film will be done first, and I'm getting that into film festivals this year.
Mm.
The Primetime Band is probably a year out. I mean, these projects just take time. So, and then yeah, it'd be great if it ends up on they end up on PBS.
Well, with your past record, your history, I'm sure it will.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed. As my grandmother would say, from your mouth to God's ears.
Yes.
I think everybody's grandmother says
Yeah.
that.
I think so.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
Allison, do you want to ask our last question?
Yeah, so we'll have to change it a little bit. So we started this thing when we first started that we ask every guest, what is the strangest photo in your collection? And sometimes we tweak it a little bit. And I'm kind of thinking for you, was there a particular photo in the film? We'll keep it to that that stood out to you, or video snippet. Not, and I'm talking not a snippet of one of the interviews talking, but
No,
something that you used to help, tell the story,
it
their
would
photo, their
definitely
video.
be, yeah, it would definitely be that snippet of video of Marianne getting off of the boat at age 8.
Mm,
That to me, I mean, at that up until that point, I didn't know I was going to make a feature film. And when I heard her story and saw that snippet, that was it. I said, this has got to be something, this is bigger than I thought it was. And I've got to make a feature film and I've got to get this out there in a bigger way. And so
mm.
that was such a pivotal moment for me that, no question about it. That was definitely the piece of footage that set everything into motion.
How far into the process were you when you when
I was
you
probably a
did that
year or
part?
two into the process. At first when I started, I thought maybe it'd be a web series and maybe I just like do
Mm.
these little webisodes. And I never done a film. I mean, I never even done a web series, so I don't know what made me think I could do a feature film, but I just knew it was so these stories were way too important. And I think when I started the project, I thought I was just going to be collecting the wisdom of all these people. And then I realized as I was delving deeper that it was not only their wisdom, but also their stories that I wanted to collect and share before they were lost. And so that, in some cases, hopefully we don't repeat history. And to share them was in some way that I thought would get a bigger audience. That was when I saw that video and I did that interview with Marion, that was it.
I'm glad it wasn't a web series. I think there's something about the way the film builds that, and it's not super long, just over an hour. I don't
Hmm.
remember exactly because it went
Yeah,
by
it's
really
72
quickly.
minutes. Yeah.
Um, but there's something about, so much of what we consume now are tiny, tiny, quick snaps of 30
Right.
seconds, maybe a minute. 2 minutes would be really, really long. And there's something about watching this film from the beginning, all 72 minutes through the end, that builds, the stories build, and the impact of it builds. So I am very happy that it ended up as a feature film and not these little tiny,
Yeah.
I have a short attention span. I'd probably, if you release them once a week, I'd probably get through a few weeks and then I forget about it. So
Yeah.
I love that it's a film,
Oh,
that it's all
thank you.
together, and everybody needs to go watch it. And now I have my next book that I clearly need to read too. So
There you
I
we'll put
I
the
go.
was
link to the
thinking,
book also in the show notes so people can find that too.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I would love to put a few links to some of that inexpensive equipment that you're talking
Mm.
about, like your lapel mic or whatever. I'm always looking for great suggestions like that. I know there's a DJI mic or something like that
Mhm.
that connects to an iPhone easily. But yeah, anything you can share with our audiences so they can hopefully tackle this in the new year as a goal.
Yeah. Or
It's a
they can
good New
keep it
Year's
very
project.
simple.
Yeah.
Yes, either way, pick your level of how you want to go about it. If you just want to get the story, use your phone. Just get the story,
That's
right?
the
And
most
then you
important
you can
thing.
decide if you want to step it up. Some of our professionals, I am sure that listen would definitely want to step it up with more equipment, but I don't want to leave out the people who just, you know, stick your phone on the table, let
Yep.
somebody talk.
And hey, I was a complete and total novice when I started this. I mean, I was a still photographer, but I'd never done video. So I think that one of the lessons that I learned was don't be afraid to ask for help. I asked a lot of people for help. I used to go into the Apple store and get help on video. And like I have
Mm.
my Apple gurus are listed actually in the credits as a thank you because I had no idea of what I was doing. So I think the most important thing is that you have a goal of what you want to do, and then you can ask people and how to get there. So don't let the equipment or not knowing what you're doing stop you, impede you from moving forward. Just have that passion and follow your passion, and that everything will fall into place.
What a
That's amazing.
perfect way to end this interview, I think. Thank you so much. This was fascinating. Now I want to go watch the film again. And now that my kids are home, And we got some grandparents coming. Maybe we'll all sit and watch it
Perfect.
together. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Well, we appreciate your time and so thankful that you agreed to be our guest. Well, Allison, wow, I just absolutely love this conversation with Sky. Let me put my cat down that's been gnawing on my fingers.
We saw the
Um,
cat. Yeah. I
yeah,
know, it's incredible. Just her passion for telling the story, getting the stories out there, and also her tips too on how we can do it. Like, it doesn't have to be a feature film. I think it's really important to remember, just get the story. It
yeah,
doesn't matter what the format is, really. And then if you want to take it up a notch, we've also got some suggestions there from her too. It's just I can't even. I like documentaries anyway, I will say that. But there was something truly remarkable about this one. It drew, like I said before, my husband and I both watched it together. It drew us both in. We were not checking our texts or emails or answering the phone while watching this movie. And I really hope everybody out there will add it to your list. Um,
yeah. I think it's a must watch. The thread is like a a heartstring that she weaves through the whole story, and it is just very heartwarming, and just so well done. And I totally could relate to many of the characters in the documentary, because I call them characters because they're so lively with their stories, um, and their personalities just come through so well. So,
yeah.
what a great episode!
It's a great way to start the year.
Yes,
Big things ahead, but I love that we started 2025 with this interview.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, another one's in the can.
Another one's in a can. Hopefully by the time we film the next one, I will have heat and I won't be sitting in front of my snow. You'll know if I change my background for our next episode that the heat situation has been resolved.
Well, hopefully for everyone's concern. Yeah. Yes. All
All
right.
right.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks, Allison. Bye bye. That's it for our show today. Remember, you can find this episode on all of your favorite podcast apps. Be sure to click follow so you can stay up to date with the latest in photo organizing. We'll catch you next month.